Good afternoon, everyone. Normally, the hour or the minutes after lunch would be the kind of sleepy minutes. I hope I don't lull you to sleep. And well, the topic is something that probably is very relevant, I must say. We talk about security nowadays. It's not just about physical or infrastructure or related topics, but it's really the heart of our economy or even the world right now. Is really cyber risk is something that's probably become very, very relevant, and we cannot overemphasize that statement. And I want to walk you through the discussion points that I'd like to touch on for the next 30 minutes, and probably the lessons and the takeaways that hopefully I'll be able to impart to you. So cybersecurity trends in capital markets, I'll be discussing that with you. There you go. Yeah. So the disclaimer is that any statements I make throughout the presentation should be attributed to me alone and not to my organization. So thank you for that. So cybersecurity and resilience, right? Very much, I would say, everyday discussions nowadays when you flip through the business pages or if you flip through Facebook or the social media, these, why the top management, in fact, why are they listening to you when you talk about this? Because it could hurt your bottom line. It could hurt your share price. It could hurt your reputation. And in today's world, those could run into the millions of dollars or even trillions of pesos, right? So cybersecurity and resilience. What are the initiatives now in terms of trends, in terms of collaboration initiatives, not just for the private sector, but also between and among the public and the private sectors? And whenever you're faced with a common problem, outside of the collaboration and the partnerships, you always look to probably developing common frameworks towards having common standards, right? You have to speak the same language. And I think that's now top of mind also. That's also one of the actions being undertaken by nations, how they can, or if that's even probably desired, can we come up with standards, whether this could be prescriptive, whether this will provide mandatory guidelines, or probably just, at least to light the fire in a couple of ways, with respect to addressing this very common problem. So that's the third part. And I'd end with the lessons and I think takeaways for the entire presentation. So what you see here, my vision for this slide was, I think last year, I was reading up on the World Surfing Championships held in South Africa. And Mick Fanning was one of the top surfers. And I think I saw in one of the publications of McKinsey, there was a write-up exactly about that. And we're saying, throughout the course of the competition, he knew that there was something that was following him, right? And he didn't know at that time that it was actually a great white shark that was actually tailing him, right? So that's pretty much the story of cyber risk. In fact, if you look at this one, I'm not sure if the crowd actually knows that there's that danger lurking around within the vicinity, right? And so you have two responses. It's either you close your eyes and just not recognize that reality, or you define parameters and see how you can manage the risk, right? And that's probably a big statement to make, because in a lot of ways, you could be reactive, or you could also decide to be proactive. I don't want to be philosophical about it, but in terms of cyber risk, some people are saying you can never be proactive because you don't know who you're up against. You don't know. In the cloud, it's up in the cloud. You don't know whether it's coming out of China or Russia or some other geographic location. But the reality is, even if you say you cannot be proactive, well, most of the time we are reacting. And by taking a mindset where we are not fully in control of it, but I guess by collaborating and coming up with common solutions and always tweaking it. Why? Because there's evolution happening. I'm referring probably to the financial markets. As the markets evolve, as the way we do business, the way we source funds evolve, there's also an evolution of the risks, right? And I was chatting with Richard before the start of the session. I was telling him, I was pondering about it. Probably 5 years ago, you'd say cyber risk is a black swan, right? A black swan event is, as we define it in financial markets, is a very low probability event, but high impact. But now I'm seeing more of it nowadays. So the white swan is now becoming a A black swan is now a white swan. No? There was a time they thought all swans were white. That they discovered in Australia, there's actually a species called, which is a black swan. No? So cyber risk is no different, right? The moment we realize that it's clear and present, and the danger is there, right? The clear and present danger, then it gets us excited to make sure that we are protecting ourselves. And if we're exposed to that risk, we can be resilient and get back to the way we do business, even when there's a successful attack. All right. So we've heard about this start of the year, right? The heist that started out of the Federal Bank of New York, found its way into several territories, including our country, 81 million US dollars, Bangladesh money, right? Central bank money. So cyber resilience as well as cyber security. The definition, textbook definition of cyber security is, it's the reduction of risk to critical infrastructure via defense or cyber measures to intrusions and attacks, right? So that's cyber security. When you talk about resilience, on the other hand, is actually the way you prepare for and adapt to changing conditions. And the goal is really to be able to recover rapidly, right? Resilience is the way in which you can bounce back from an attack, or if yesterday we saw the market was down, and if you're able to recover, let's say in the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, for example, our market was one of the more resilient markets. It was just in 2008 when our market was down by around 50%, but subsequent to that, we were able to bounce back. The same is true with respect to cyber resilience, and I think I'm giving that as an example because that should be the goal, to be resilient. And not just to be able to ward off the defense, because if you're able to ward off the defense, pretty sure there might be cases where there would be cracks or gaps in your defense, and are you able to come back from a, let's say, a debilitating attack, right? So cyber resilience probably is the bigger goal for us. And this is an interesting study conducted by PwC, and what we're seeing here, big numbers, is that security incidents have been rising for 2016 compared to 2015, right? We're not even done with half of the year. We're seeing around 38% uptick in terms of the incidence of cyber resilience, right? Or cyber attacks, right? Threats that may actually, that cyber criminals may want to infiltrate your networks, right? Probably they are already there via malwares. And average of 200 days, no? I was talking to a technology expert from the US Air University, and he was telling me that based on their studies, a malware would be sitting in your system, average 200 days. And what it does is actually it encrypts, it checks what you normally do by way of your passcodes, your behavior, and it looks for a backdoor, and when it finds that backdoor, it hits you when you least expect it, right? So our systems may already be infected with malwares. So that's why there's the incidence of cyber attacks actually increasing on a daily basis. How much in terms of potential estimated losses? These are just estimates. These are more than 500 billion US, so roughly around 27 trillion pesos in terms of potential losses on a global scale, right? So you can see it's not insignificant. It's very material, right? So that number is escalating. And which sectors are most at risk? Well, normally you'd say those which are high profile, because if you want to make a statement, then you want to hit the bigger profile institutions, right? So financial institutions like us, the Philippine Stock Exchange, are included in the hit list, right? The same way, I think that the others in the top three would be the public sector, those which are connected with the government, as well as in the healthcare. Because in the healthcare, you get more dissatisfaction if there's an infiltration by the cyber criminals. So these are the facts. But who are the sources of these cyber attacks? What we're seeing is not just internal, could not just be collusion from within your employee base or within your stakeholder base, but even to third-party partners, no? So there are also points of failure, we call it in technology, it's points of failure not just within the organization, but also coming from outside the organization via the third-party providers. So that's something that's very, I would say, an eye-opener for us. When you now look at partnerships, you also have to insulate yourselves, because those could be potential backdoors via the criminals will enter, right? So this is the same study. What's highlighted here is that there's actually a heightened awareness now, because now when you talk to board members, this is not anymore a business as usual approach. In fact, I'd state that otherwise. Discussions on cybersecurity are now part of the business as usual agenda, right? And it cannot be any other way simply because the reputational risk is so immense that your business can actually be toppled and you'll be on your knees, and God knows until when you could actually recover from such a loss, right? All right. What are nations doing? EU and the US are pretty much aligned. They're establishing what's called information sharing analytics organizations. And what this is really a public-private consultation looking to how they can actually share information and see probably where they can strengthen the networks in terms of resilience and recovery, right? The goal is always not just to defend, but really to be able to recover. No? In financial markets, for example, we have a recovery time objective, and this is a standard that we adhere very closely to. So while that could not always be mandated, there's always a case-to-case scenario, but at least having that objective in mind is very useful. The same framework is being adopted by governments when you talk about the initiatives between the public and the private sector. Closer to home, Hong Kong also has the same initiative. They call the Cybersecurity Fortification Initiative. Threefold, the three pillars to this initiative, right? Cyber resilience. There's also a component on developing the people, professional development program. At the end of the day, even if you actually subscribe to licenses for anti-DDoS or antivirus programs, it's still how you're able to monitor, number one. No? The human component is still the one that will drive this process. So professional development, because this is an ever-evolving, I would say, industry, right? It's now become a big industry. And the better informed and the better updated individuals are the ones who are able to actually nip it in the bud. So that's a professional development program. The third pillar of the Hong Kong's fortification initiative in terms of cybersecurity is an information sharing platform, right? Because we're all in this together. We have aligned initiatives, and it's no use if you're not able to actually, because it's an ecosystem. You're only as strong as your weakest link. So any lessons that I've derived from the Philippine experience, I'm more than happy to share actually with our network of exchanges around the world. The same strategy is being implemented in Hong Kong. Look at Singapore. They created even a cybersecurity, CSA, cybersecurity agency, right? And it's entered into MOUs, cooperation agreements with the UK, with France, and other nations, and continues to engage other economies, right? So they want to learn from the experiences of other countries. Back home, we already have, I think there's been news of the DICT, the Department of Information Communications Technology, and I think a very big task in terms of coming up with a national strategy against cybersecurity, right? Look at regional arrangements. We have, if you're an exchange like us, if you're, for example, a clearinghouse, if you are a custodian bank or financial ecosystem, capital market, debt market, you have to be part of a network. And we're part of what's called the IOSCO, International Organization of Securities Commissions. And it's a standard-setting body, number one, and it's an area, it's an avenue where we're able to have dialogues, multi-sectoral dialogues with the other ecosystem participants. And what the trend now is they're coming up with standards, right? The debate is these standards could only serve to be prescriptive, right? They cannot mandate because there's no enforcement powers in terms of these regional associations, right? But for example, I highlight that because of the recent survey, we were saying 53% of the participating stock exchanges have experienced a cyber attack in the past year, right? And probably this is not information they'd like to share with you or we'd like to share with you, but that's reality. So what do we do now in face of these attacks? We came up with what's called a guidelines in terms of issuer reporting. The issuer are the listed companies or the securities issuers, right? These are the companies that actually fundraise to actually get their products or strategies funded, right? So there are requirements on the issuers in terms of what they should disclose to the public. Uncomfortable as it may be, there has to be guidance for the investors. Because why is that? Because this is a real risk. It could hurt your bottom line, it could hurt your market price. So that's on the side of issue reporting. On the side of trading venues, we are a trading venue. We provide the infrastructure, we provide the facility and the rules, mechanisms by which money flows from person A to person B. And there's also certain guidelines for that. What about the middlemen, the agencies, the financial intermediaries? There's also guidelines that are applicable to them as we have come up with by way of IOSCO standards. The asset managers and financial market infrastructures. Now, these are in the interest of time, I'd probably highlight just three of them: the issuer disclosures, the trading venues, as well as the FMIs, the financial market infrastructures. So if you're a listed company and you experience a cyber attack, and for example, it creates disruption in your business, are you required to mandate that? Yes and no. The standard that we always follow is if it's material to your business, in the sense that materiality is defined by whether an investor would consider that, in his reasonable judgment, relevant in making a decision to buy or sell your security. So it's very subjective, yes, but you would always want to err on the side of disclosing, right? I always say, when in doubt, disclose. So what do you disclose? Do you fully disclose everything so that you're bearing your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities? Maybe that's not a wise strategy, but you do want to inform your investors that you have satisfactorily or you have successfully resolved these issues, right? Because definitely it will hit the papers, definitely your investors will complain, your system was down, I could not access your website, and all it says was that there's an unauthorized attack or an authorized, I would say, disruption. So issuer disclosures, you have to state why and what's the root cause if you're able to already identify that. Maybe it will take time. So at least when it happens, if and when it happens, you're able to come up with a common statement. To follow would be your root cause analysis, right? It's, so far as you're actually holding the hands of your investors to tell them you're in control. Because the worst message is for them to perceive that you're not in control of the situation. So that's number one. Number two would be the root cause analysis, if you're already able to determine the source and the nature of the cyber risk, right? That's very important. And the possible outcome of that cyber incident. And are you able to provide for an alternative if there is a shutdown of your, let's say, your portal, if there's a shutdown of your system? And how would that impact your other participants? Did you do testing so that they're prepared to switch over to a DR, a disaster recovery mechanism or site? Are you able to provide that? And that's actually number four. What are the preventive measures in order not just to mitigate risk, but also to continue the way you do business? So business continuity is the goal, right? Because you want the disruption to be as minimal as possible. And number five is whether the material breach has been, whether that's a recurrence of a previous issue and how that affects your overall strategy. These are just guidelines, but if you're an issuer, you would be well-minded to actually consider, I would say, at least number one, number two, and number three to be the main disclosure items. So that's on the part of the issuer. If you look at this slide, this pertains to trading venue. A trading venue is an infrastructure provider, like an exchange, where we provide services by way companies can actually go to us, list with us, and do their fundraising activities, right? That's a benefit of being part of that ecosystem. If and when you need resources, you're not just limited to the banks. You can actually tap the institutional investors. You can go and raise $1 billion overnight placement, right? You don't have to wait for weeks on end to fundraise your project. So if you're a trading venue, what are the guidelines that are in place when you're exposed to these vulnerabilities? No? Again, it's not a question of if, but when. No? When you get to that point where you have to make that call, when number one is you have to first realize that we are now the subject of a cyber attack, right? And your systems may show, for example, your anti-denial of service systems would say, okay, on a daily basis, you're facing, let's say, thousands and thousands of anti-DDoS attacks, right? So, and it would register there the amount of time that they were trying to access your system. It could be just one minute, it could be 15, 30 minutes. So what do you do about that? Yeah? It could eat up your bandwidth. And that's also one of the ways by which they're able to disrupt your business. They would bombard you with a lot of attempts to enter your system. So that eats up your bandwidth, so that for your real business, you're left with not enough bandwidth, right? So that's also a way for you to think, do I increase my bandwidth? And what do I do to actually provide for enough buffer, right? So as a trading venue, those are considerations that we have to think of if we want to have sustained and continuous service. And look at the life cycle here. It could be pre-trade, it could be execution, settlement. So that's end-to-end, right? The moment you key in your order, if you're facing your trading terminal, if you're doing online trading, or let's say you're an institutional broker, whereby you have your own network, then that's already a point where you could also be disrupted. by the cyber criminals, right? But that's not the end. Once you're able to successfully input that using the technology, security features, you have your unique password, username, so you're good. You're able to access your terminal. There's also potential points of failure when it's being transmitted from your front-end terminal all the way to the main engine. Because along the line, there could be several issues there. And even as and when it's being processed, that could also be a point where the cyber risk materializes, right? So that's on the trading part, the execution. Post-trade, for example, you traded today and there was a match, no? The buyer and seller agreed. 3 days later is when it finally gets to be executed, right? In markets, we call that DVP, delivery versus payment. But that 3 days is 3 days of eternity. There could be a lot of issues coming from the banks, coming from the custodians for the securities, where who actually warehouses the actual securities. So those 3 days exposes you to a lot of risk. What do you do in order to mitigate that? And trade dissemination, when you date the data that comes out of your system, when you distribute that, it could also be corrupted so that the market gets incorrect data. And so when they make decisions, then they make decisions based on improper or incorrect data, right? That's also a potential point of failure. And obviously, the last point is surveillance of surveillance activities, because as trading venues, we also do self-police, we do self-regulatory activities, and that could also be a point where you're not able to get the trends and patterns, which would probably cause certain alarm bells to sound off simply because there's already corruption of your data that's going into your system, your surveillance system, right? Those are just examples of trading venue cyber risk issues, right? Financial market infrastructures, which are technically these are your central counterparties, your clearing houses, your warehouse, the CSDs, the securities depository, no? Because before, right, remember certificates of stock used to be in rooms, held up in rooms, and you would see reams full of stock certificates. Now everything's in the cloud. Now everything's electronic. Everything is now, I would say, scriptless. So that's also a potential point of failure. If it gets corrupted, how do you validate the data? And what security measures are in place so that the trading venue can actually rely on the information that's coming out of the financial market infrastructures, right? And you see it here, for purposes of risk management, what's important is you evolve with the risks that are present in the market. You test before you roll out your system. And testing here is no longer confined to just the micro level. Whenever we do testing, it's always industry-wide. And that's the hardest part, right? Because there will always be complaints, or participants will say, okay, here you go again. I need to change my system, meaning I need to shell out resources again. I need to train my people. But the reality is it's a process of evolution. We're evolving. We're discovering better ways of doing things. So the evolution has to go hand in hand with the testing component, because otherwise you're exposing your systems to higher risk, right? And a lesson I've learned is that if you're buying off-the-shelf solutions, actually, I would say that the risks that there could be bugs would probably be lower compared to customized software or customized solutions. Why? Because in customized solutions, you only realize that there's a problem when there actually is a problem that hits you, right? Opposed to what? To off-the-shelf solutions, like, for example, your iPhones. Other individuals are using it, so probably you'll learn from their mistakes. There will be bugs that they'll discover, and so you'll be the beneficiary of that. When you talk about customized solutions, it's a different story. You may be, at the end of the day, the worst hit, and you're unable to actually address that. So that's key to me whenever I look at security features for application systems. All right? So situational awareness, of course, as I said, you have to know what's happening in the environment in terms of how they're able to better cope with the system, right? For the longest time, they were saying the physical servers are the way to go because you are actually able to load balance the applications. But now we're going via virtual servers, right? And they say, but going virtual by way of your servers also poses its own set of risks, right? There could be queuing problems. In fact, that's one of the issues that we encountered last year, right? There could be queuing problems. The software may not be behaving as you expected it. Because when you come up with these softwares, there are certain expected behaviors. You realize later on they're not behaving as expected. So then that exposes you to certain risks. This is just a snapshot of the financial market infrastructure issues. And I think third item there on the left side is the 2-hour recovery time objective, right? Is 2 hours too short? Is it too long? Depends all the time. And within that 2 hours, if the goal is to recover, remember, you don't want to open again for business in the case of an attack, only to find out that your data is actually not accurate. That's the worst thing that can happen. Then you have to shut down again. So within that 2-hour period, it's not just going back up your system, but more important is validating that based on your backup system, the information integrity is in check, right? Because you don't want to be exposed to potential losses later on just because you brought back your system to normal only to find out that your data is actually corrupted. Response and recovery of 2 hours is the goal. Okay, in terms of the PSE, we also adopted the same, and I think just to highlight, the process here that we're undertaking it's collaborative, and at the same time, you are the best judge of what's needed in your market, given the resource constraints, right? I always say whenever I'm discussing with my IT team, forget about the identities of the cyber criminals, right? Probably we'll never get to identify them, but I would rather focus on the nature of the disruption. Because if you focus on the nature of the disruption, you're better able to address the risks that go with it, right? And I'd say this is answering the why rather than just the what. No? Why do they do it? And what are they after? And why do they want that, right? Because you're not just after the keys of the castle, just to have access to your castle. What they want is actually certain information, certain disruptions. And probably it's a statement they want to make. Probably they want to bring you down so that you look bad before the international community. So that way your defenses are more suitable given the risk that you're facing, right? Okay, so we went through the trends in terms of the cyber issues we're facing. Reality number one is maybe we can be, the aspiration is to be proactive, but for the moment, until technology is able to evolve faster than the way these criminals are coming up with their systems, then probably being reactive is not such a bad idea. Provided you have to couple that with your ability to come back and to recover so that you're able to offer continuous service to your clients, right? And so that's cyber resilience, in addition to being cyber secure. That's lesson number one. They are now commonplace, so realizing that, then let's minimize the loss, right? If we can't altogether eliminate the loss or the risk, then let's mitigate the risk. It's not a question of if, but a question of when. Second lesson that we've learned is that, well, the public sector and the private sector have to be in the same boat in this initiative, right? It's not just the private sector being more secure or the public sector being more advanced in this regard, simply because one ecosystem, the systemic risk that's faced by everyone could impact everyone, right? It's not just confined, or it's not just coupled with a particular segment or industry. It spills over simply because technology has allowed us to actually become more connected, right? And I'm not just talking about within the country, or within the region, but actually globally. The global nature of markets exposes us to higher risk of a systemic failure. So that's actually, it's in the best interest of everyone to share the learnings and the lessons, right? So that's item number 2. And item number 3, the collaborative role of everyone in terms of information gathering, probably start with awareness, because for all you know, information is already there, but you're not aware. So awareness, and then gather the relevant information, see what you can learn from it and share with the regulators and even your counterparts, not just domestically, but also globally. And I think number 4 item is that the systemic risk component cannot be overemphasized, right? When you look at regulations now, people always complain, it's so costly to comply with the Basel standards. It's so costly to comply, let's say, with the standards in Europe or even in North America, in the Philippines. But the reality is, we're just trying to also go and see where there could be a better solution, right? And so, prudential measures cannot just be micro, but macro, bigger picture. And prudence dictates that interconnectedness, being the name of the game now because of technology, right? Then we should also be interconnected in terms of our defense. You don't want to have an opening for the cyber criminals, right? All right, so all in all, we need to redefine the way we do business. It cannot anymore be, I'll just buy the most sophisticated, highest version of the anti-DDoS, right? You're throwing away good money. Why? Because you probably would benefit more if you get a lower version of the maintenance agreement, for example, but your people are more equipped and they understand what monitoring needs to be done by them, how they should escalate whatever findings they see per second, and right, and that it's really a 24/7 endeavor. It doesn't end when your trading closes at 3:30 p.m. because they will hit you on the back door when you're actually least expecting it, right? And we've seen this in the first quarter of this year when a lot of attacks in the trading venues actually happen during off trading. So that by the time you're preparing the next trading day, you realize that your information has been corrupted, right? So it's a 24/7 endeavor. Do you appoint an officer so that you appoint certain shifts so that you're protected the entire time, right? So probably that's a prudent course of action. And appointing just one person to oversee it may not do the job. You would probably need certain other participants within the organization to oversee that person's performance, right? So it should redefine the way we do to protect business. And I think at the end of the day, technology is our best ally, best friend, but realize that it could also be your worst enemy. We don't want it to be our worst enemies because technology has made business more efficient. It's allowed us to cross geographic boundaries. It's allowed us to do cross-border trading. It's allowed us to actually have a trading system, for example, where you can get clients from Europe or North America or the US or even within Asia to trade without having to contact a local broker. All they have to do is to contact their domestic broker, and that domestic broker can actually interface with a counterpart broker, right? So in that sense, it's very efficient, but reality is there would always be opportunists out there who would want to take advantage of this. And I leave you with, I think last February, there was an incident where this online flower shop was actually held hostage by the cyber criminals, right? And normally if you're a flower shop, that's when you make the most money, during February 14 week. And they had to pay up simply because they felt that by paying up, they're able to minimize their losses, right? Can you imagine you're down the entire time that February 14, Valentine's Day. So this could be a way by way they're getting ransom from you, they're extracting value add, or they're extracting resources from your business that would otherwise have been channeled to achieve your strategies, but the reality is it's there. So that your recourse is to also protect yourself, and we feel that continuous dialogue and partnerships, as well as also making sure that you understand, no? This is not just an outsourced problem. This is to be adopted. You have to embrace this problem. And I think we need everyone's help so that together we can find a solution. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you around. Thank you very much.